The salt spray of the North Sea lashed against the jagged rocks of Orkney with a primal ferocity. A place where the sun felt like a distant, dying memory and the wind carried the ancient, whispered secrets of the old gods. In the highest, most desolate tower of the bleakest castle, Queen Morgause stood like a statue of ice, her eyes fixed eternally on the southern horizon where the lush, unsuspecting lands of Britain lay in golden splendor. She was a woman born of the highest royal blood, the eldest daughter of Gorwa and the fair Igraine. Yet she moved through her halls like a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had sought to erase her very existence. Her heart was a pressurized cauldron of cold, black fury, fueled by the agonizing memory of a father brutally slain and a mother stolen in the night by the lustful High King, Uther Pendragon. Morgause was never merely a queen of mortal men. She was a mistress of the unseen realms, a high sorceress whose formidable power was woven into the very fabric of the shadows that danced in the corners of history, while her sisters followed diverging paths. Morgan Le Fay, retreating into the mystical depths of Avalon, and Elaine into the quiet safety of domesticity. Morgause chose the jagged, narrow path of the viper. She watched from her northern exile as a young, naive boy named Arthur pulled a legendary sword from a stone, being hailed by the mindless masses as the true king and the singular hope of a fractured Britain. To the dreaming world, Arthur was a golden savior, but to Morgause, he was the living, breathing evidence of the horrific sin and betrayal that had systematically destroyed her family. The blood of Pendragon must pay in kind, she whispered to the freezing gale, her voice a low, rhythmic incantation that made the torches in her chamber flicker, gasp, and eventually die. She did not seek a simple, crude assassination, for a quick death by steel was far too merciful for the cursed legacy of Uther Pendragon and his illegitimate line. She sought a total, spiritual ruin that would rot the kingdom from its very heart, a vengeance so profound that it would echo through the halls of time for 1,000 years. Under a moonless sky, Morgause summoned the ancient spirits of the north, offering slow drops of her own royal crimson blood upon a bowl of polished, reflective obsidian. The thick vapors rose in the cold air, twisting into grotesque shapes of falling crowns and bleached skeletons, reflecting the dark, inevitable destiny she intended to weave for her half-brother. She possessed a terrifying secret that Arthur himself did not yet understand. They were of the same womb, separated only by the blood of a tyrant and the cruel hand of fate. With the predatory grace of a hunting cat, she traveled south across the moors, shedding her heavy northern furs for silks that shimmered with the iridescent, deceptive light of a serpent's scales. She arrived at the burgeoning court of the young king like a vision of northern beauty and regal mystery, a presence so commanding that it dazzled the knights of the Round Table and silenced the poets. Arthur, blinded by the radiance of his own newfound sovereignty, saw only a noble, long-lost sister returning to the warm embrace of her family's fold. He lacked the vision to see the ancient darkness coiled behind her perfect smile, and he failed to sense the invisible web of enchantments she began to meticulously spin around the stone halls of Camelot. Morgause used her physical beauty as a flawless mask and her spoken words as poison honey, ensuring that every soft gesture was a calculated step toward his ultimate downfall. In the quiet, heavy hours of the moon's peak, she performed a ritual of deep magic that would seal the tragic fate of the Pendragon line once and for all. Through a night of forbidden sorcery and tragic, mutual ignorance, the seed of Camelot's eventual destruction was planted within her, a curse masquerading as a child. When she finally left the king's bed at dawn, she felt no tremor of guilt. She felt only the cold, sharp satisfaction of a hidden blade finally finding its mark in the dark. She returned to the frozen, echoing isolation of Orkney, her belly carrying the fruit of a sin that would eventually wear a crown of thorns and bring an empire to its knees. Decades passed in the north, and while Arthur labored to build a world of chivalry, justice, and light, Morgause raised her sons in a forge of pure, unadulterated bitterness. Gawain, Agravain, Garrus, and Gareth, they were her prideful lions, taught from birth to love their mother with ferocity and to distrust the shifting world beyond their shores. But it was the youngest, Mordred, who was her true masterpiece, a child of deep shadow born specifically to eclipse the rising sun of King Arthur's reign. She whispered the jagged truth of his forbidden birth into Mordred's ears every night, until it became his only reality, his only breath, and his only holy purpose. "You are the only rightful heir to the throne," she told him under the pale, indifferent northern stars, born to reclaim what the Golden King stole from our ancestors. Morgause watched with the vulture's patience from her distant throne, as her sons traveled south to Camelot to serve the very man she had spent her life loathing. It was all a part of her grand, intricate design. She required her own flesh and blood to be the spies at the heart of the kingdom, watching for the first cracks to form in the Round Table. She communicated with them through scrying mirrors of dark, still water, her voice reaching across hundreds of miles like a chilling breeze that refused to be ignored. The sorceress understood that even the strongest, most enchanted steel has a microscopic breaking point, and Arthur's greatest weakness was his desperate belief in the inherent goodness of men. She expertly manipulated the rising whispers of Lancelot and Guinevere's forbidden passion, feeding the fire of public scandal from the safety of her shadowy northern fortress. Every letter she intercepted and every rumor she subtly planted was a thread pulled violently from the beautiful tapestry of Arthur's impossible dream of a perfect world. Morgause knew that the greatest and most fortified empires are never conquered from the outside, but are systematically dismantled from within by those they trust the most. As the years wore on, her magic grew more potent and more desperate, turning her hair to the color of winter silver and her heart into a polished, unyielding stone. She was the invisible architect of the coming tragedy, the silent conductor of a grand orchestra composed of betrayal, lust, and ancient, unhealed wounds. She watched her son Mordred grow into a man of sharp, lethal intellect and even sharper resentment, a perfect, terrifying mirror of her own vengeful soul. The simmering conflict between the hot-blooded sons of Orkney and the noble knights of the south began to slowly bleed the resources and spirit of the kingdom dry. Blood was eventually spilled in the hallowed hallways of Camelot, and Morgause drank a toast to every single drop from her heavy, golden chalice in the north. Yet, even a queen who commands the shadows is not entirely immune to the unpredictable chaos she unleashes upon the world. Her sons became deeply divided. Some grew to truly love the king she hated, while others remained fanatically loyal to her dark, uncompromising vision of the future. The rising tension within her own royal bloodline was a wildfire she had ignited, but could no longer hope to control or extinguish. One fateful, stormy night, a son discovered his mother in a compromising position that violently challenged his own warped northern sense of honor and propriety. The irony was as bitter as the sea. The woman who had lived her entire life for the sake of vengeance was brought down by the very violence she had cultivated in her own children. Garis, blinded by a sudden, irrational rage that mirrored her own, struck the lethal blow that ended the life of the Witch Queen of Orkney. As her lifeblood ebbed away onto the cold, indifferent stone floor, Morgause did not cry out in womanly fear or beg for a mercy she had never granted. She looked up at her son with a gaze that was both pitying and strangely triumphant, as if this final betrayal was the ultimate proof of her teachings. Even in the moment of her death, she knew she had won the long game. Her sons were broken, and the seeds of Mordred's final rebellion were now fully grown. Her body was returned to the dark earth of her ancestors, but her spirit remained like a heavy, suffocating mist draped over the entire Isle of Britain. Mordred used the news of his mother's violent death as a final, piercing rallying cry, the ultimate excuse to tear the crown from Arthur's weary head. The Battle of Camlin was the final, bloody act of the grand play Morgause had started writing in her tower decades before. On that desolate, gore-soaked field, the fragile dream of Camelot finally died in the mud alongside the men who had dared to believe in it. Father and son slew one another in a final embrace of hate, leaving a land in total darkness and a round table broken into useless splinters. Morgause was the essential catalyst, the woman who proved to history that a wounded, focused heart can be more dangerous than 1,000 marching armies. Her story is often buried or whispered beneath the legends of shining knights and noble kings. Yet she was the one who held the scissors of fate. She was a daughter seeking a terrible justice for a forgotten crime, a sister seeking to reclaim a heritage stolen by the greed of a Pendragon. In the long, dark history of magic, she stands as a stark reminder that power fueled by spite creates nothing but a lasting legacy of ash and ruin. The sorceresses of the old world were not merely cartoonish villains. They were complex women navigating a world of men who feared the depth of their power. Morgause was the relentless storm that the High House of Pendragon simply could not weather, no matter how strong their walls or their faith. Some local legends say that on the windiest, most violent nights in Orkney, you can still hear her chilling laughter echoing through the coastal ruins. It is a sound of haunting, ethereal beauty, a melody of a queen who rejected the path of the victim and chose her own dark route to immortality. She refused to be a mere footnote in the chronicles of Arthur's glory, choosing instead to be the grand architect of his absolute and total ruin. Her vengeance was a slow-acting, inevitable poison, one that ensured the sun would set on the golden age of Britain for a long, cold time. To truly understand the myth, we must look at her not just as a monster of legend, but as a mirror reflecting the cruelty of her own era. She was forged in the white-hot fires of King Arthur's lust and tempered in the freezing, unforgiving salt spray of the northern seas. To understand the heart of Morgause is to understand the true cost of a crown, built on the broken bones of the innocent and the forgotten. Her high magic was more than a weapon. It was a language of survival, a way to exert her indomitable will when every other door had been locked against her. She walked through the sacred halls of history with a heavy, deliberate tread, leaving behind footprints that seemed to bleed into the soil of Britain. The legend of the Queen of Orkney serves as a permanent warning to those who believe they can simply bury the past and move on unscathed, for the past has a terrifying way of rising from the grave, armed with ancient spells and a hunger for retribution that cannot be satisfied by words. Morgause was the necessary shadow to Arthur's artificial light, and in the tragic end, the shadow proved to be entirely inescapable. Her sons became legends in their own right, heroes and villains alike, but they were always, first and foremost, the children of the northern sorceress. Their personal tragedies were merely extensions of her own, and their failures were the echoes of her own shattered, unloved heart. Even the great Morgan Le Fay was said to fear the sheer intensity of her sister's focus, for Morgause was a woman who had nothing left to lose. When a person has nothing left to lose and a mind full of ancient power, they cease to be human and become a relentless force of nature. She commanded the literal tides of the sea and the metaphorical hearts of men, with a level of ferocity that modern history has forgotten. The very tapestries of Camelot are woven with the invisible threads of her influence. Though her name is usually whispered only in the deepest fear, she represents the untamed, destructive power of the feminine, the aspect of the ancient goddess that must destroy the old to make room for the new. But the new world that eventually followed the fall of Arthur was not the glorious one she had envisioned in her dark, lonely dreams. It was a world of absolute ruin, silence, and decay, the very thing she had once feared when she was a child in her mother's arms. Thus, the ultimate tragedy of Morgause is also the inherent tragedy of the island of Britain itself, caught in a loop of its own making. A cycle of systemic violence that began with a king's uncontrollable desire, ended with a queen's cold, calculated, and eternal spite. As we look back through the shifting mist of time and folklore, we can still see her standing tall on those high, jagged Orkney cliffs. Her silhouette is sharp and defiant against the gray, unforgiving sky, a permanent symbol of resistance against the dictates of men. She reminds every generation that the stories we tell are often written by the victors, but the deeper truth lives in the silence of the shadows. Morgause, the Queen of Vengeance, remains one of the most intellectually and emotionally complex figures in all of Western mythology. She was a grieving mother, a powerful queen, a betrayed sister, and a brilliant destroyer of all that she deemed false. Her entire life was a stark, dramatic testament to the terrifying power of memory and the long, agonizing endurance of human pain. In the final accounting of the legend, she was the wind that blew out the fragile candles of the Round Table and plunged the world into night. Let her dark story be a profound lesson in the extreme complexity of human motive and the danger of dismissing those we have wronged. For behind every so-called evil sorceress in our history books is a woman with a story that has been violently silenced or ignored. Morgause would be silenced no longer. Her final actions spoke louder and lasted longer than any celebratory bard's song or king's decree. The bloody legacy of the House of Orkney remains a chilling, essential chapter in the vast, interconnected matter of Britain. It is a chapter written in the ink of blood, the logic of magic, and the unyielding, terrifying will of a queen who refused to be forgotten. As the waves continue to crash with rhythmic violence against the northern rocks, the ghost of her grand ambition still lingers in the air. Perhaps she is still seeking the peace she never found in her earthly life, yet she holds a power that even death could not hope to diminish. We thank you for journeying through the dark shadows of the north and the tragic, echoing halls of Camelot with us today in this exploration of myth. If you were moved by this tale of power and vengeance, please comment, like, share, and subscribe to Channel Storycraft Studio for more legends,